She stood at the curb as 3 cops laughed from their patrol car. "Smile for us, Miss Boss," one sneered, snapping a photo. A week later, those same officers were fired. By her. But what happened in between? That's where it gets interesting. Let's start from the beginning. The heat pressed down, waves of distortion rippling above the pavement. Abigail kept her posture straight, her chin slightly lifted, exuding the composure that had carried her through boardrooms and congressional hearings. Yet here, on the cracked sidewalk of her hometown, none of that seemed to matter. The patrol car idled beside her, its engine humming, but the real noise came from inside. The low chuckles, the condescending tone, the mockery disguised as small talk. "Did you lose your way, ma'am?" The driver smirked, adjusting his sunglasses. "Don't see many folks like you dressed like that around here." The others snickered, their amusement growing as they watched for her reaction. Abigail didn't flinch. She had met men like this before. Men who wore their authority like armor, mistaking a badge for a free pass to belittle whoever they pleased. But there was something particularly revolting about the ease with which they did it, as if they had done this 100 times before and expected nothing to come of it. The younger officer leaned closer, resting an arm on the open window. "Relax, sweetheart. Why so serious?" His grin widened. "Give us a smile. You wouldn't want us thinking you're hostile." The implication was clear. It always was. Abigail's stomach coiled, but she stayed still. Her silence only encouraged them. The third officer, the one in the passenger seat, lifted his phone. "Man, this is gold. Lady Boss lost in the hood. Imagine the likes on this." His thumb hovered over the screen, ready to capture the moment. Their laughter filled the space between them, ringing in her ears like nails on glass. Her nails bit into her palm, but she forced herself to breathe evenly. This was a game to them. Push her, provoke her, wait for her to snap so they could twist the story in their favor. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, she memorized everything. Their faces, their badges, the way the sun glinted off the car's polished hood. They thought this moment belonged to them. They had no idea whose hands it was really in. The hotel room was quiet, but Abigail's mind was loud. The encounter replayed in her head like a scene from a bad movie. Every sneer, every chuckle, the snap of the phone camera. She had endured this kind of treatment before, but something about this time was different. Maybe because she had changed. She wasn't fresh out of law school anymore, wide-eyed and hopeful that intelligence and hard work were enough to break through barriers. She had spent the last decade carving a path through bureaucracy, learning how to wield power the way men like those officers did. Except she did it within the law. But what good was knowing every statute, every legal loophole, if people like them could still mock, harass, and walk away without consequence? Her phone buzzed, yanking her from her thoughts. James Carter. "We need to talk. Call me when you can." She didn't hesitate. "James?" "Abby." His voice was heavy, weighed down with something that made her pulse quicken. "You're not going to believe this." A notification popped up on her screen. New message received. A link. She clicked it. The video. The same officers. Their voices. Their laughter. The grainy footage shaking slightly as the camera zoomed in on her face. But it wasn't just a recording. It had been edited. The words, "When the Queen forgets she ain't royalty," flashed across the screen in bold letters. The comments section was worse. Someone put her back in her place. They should have arrested her for looking that damn entitled. Lady Boss? More like Lost Boss. Abigail's stomach clenched. The familiar cocktail of anger and exhaustion burned in her chest. She had fought so hard to outrun this, to become more than the stereotypes, to build a name that couldn't be dismissed with a joke. Yet here she was, reduced to cheap entertainment for people who would never know what it was like to walk in her shoes. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She could ignore it, let it pass. But then she remembered their laughter, the smug certainty in their voices, the way they thought she would just take it. She exhaled, slow and steady. No, not this time. The mayor's office was a study in outdated power. Mahogany furniture, thick leather chairs, walls lined with framed handshakes and empty promises. But Abigail wasn't here for pleasantries. She was here to force change. Her heels struck the marble floor in sharp, deliberate beats, each step a warning. She wasn't asking for a favor. She was demanding action. Mayor Henderson looked up from his desk, clearly unprepared to see her so soon. He had probably expected her to take the hit, swallow the humiliation, and disappear. Instead, she stood in front of him, composed, focused, and holding the very thing he didn't want to deal with. Abigail. He forced a tired smile, gesturing to the chair across from him. I didn't expect you so soon. She ignored the invitation to sit. Instead, she placed a thick folder on his desk, with just enough force to make him flinch. I want to talk about the chief of police position. The words hung in the air. Direct. Unapologetic. Henderson sighed, rubbing his temple. Abby, I know you're qualified, but what? Her voice was sharp, cutting through his hesitation like a scalpel. She folded her arms, her posture unwavering. You need a strong, competent leader to clean up this department. Someone who doesn't turn a blind eye when officers abuse their power. She could see it in his face. The internal battle between political convenience and the undeniable reality of the situation. She leaned forward. I've seen firsthand what's wrong with this department. You've seen it too. The entire city has seen it. The video had spread like wildfire. Public outrage had ignited overnight, reporters already sniffing for a response. He could pretend this was just another controversy that would die down in a few weeks, but they both knew better. She let the silence stretch, watching him weigh his options. Finally, Henderson exhaled, shaking his head. Give me until the end of the week. Abigail allowed herself the smallest nod. She had him. Flashes from cameras lit up the podium like a battlefield. The air buzzed with murmurs, the weight of the moment pressing down on the gathered crowd. Abigail stood tall, her expression unreadable. But inside, she felt the shift. The undeniable moment when power changed hands. The city had been forced to confront the truth. The video had ignited outrage, exposing more than just a few bad officers. It had revealed a system that had long protected them. Protests had followed. Demands had been made. The mayor had no choice but to act. And now, as she stood in front of reporters, she was no longer just a woman mocked on the side of the road. She was the one standing behind the podium. Mayor Henderson cleared his throat, stepping up beside her. The cameras turned toward him, ready for the official statement. After careful consideration, he began, his voice steady but measured. I am pleased to announce our new chief of police, Abigail Jones. The room erupted. Applause, cheers, the sound of a city that had been waiting for real change. But for Abigail, the real moment of victory came later. The new office smelled of fresh paint, an attempt to make it seem like something more than what it had been before. But the name on the door had changed. The desk, the chair, now hers. A knock. She turned. James Carter leaned in, a knowing grin on his face. You might want to take a look at this. He handed her a stack of papers. Termination reports. Her eyes scanned the names, but she already knew. 3 names. 3 faces she would never forget. The same officers who had mocked her, humiliated her, turned her into a joke for their own amusement. Fired. On her orders. She exhaled, slow and deep, letting the moment settle into her bones. It wasn't just about them. It was about everyone who had ever been laughed at, dismissed, reduced to nothing, because someone in uniform thought they could. This wasn't revenge. It was balance. Justice. For the first time in a long time, Abigail smiled.